Good afternoon. My name is Tom Lane. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture at the college. The McFarland Center sponsors lectures, conferences, other events on questions of meaning, morality, and mutual obligation. This semester, in the light of the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol, and so many of the events that have led up to it, the McFarland Center and many of my colleagues have been trying to think together with our students about what it's going to take to repair the fabric of our country. We developed a series in light of that to help think about that, and this is part of that series today. One area that we've thought about a lot is the degree to which Christianity, even if I'd call it deeply misguided misuses of Christianity, played an essential role in fomenting the division that we see and in justifying the insurrection as it happened. Just last week in one of those discussions we sponsored, Senator Bob Casey of the class of '82 rightly pointed the finger at white nationalism as a source of the insurrection. Those of us who study religion, though, have been aware how much Christianity has been wrapped up in and justified that and many of the worst excesses that are pulling our country apart. As a country, we have to come to grips with the degree to which some people have used Christianity to support what happened at the Capitol or at Charlottesville or elsewhere. As I've said in other contexts, we have to come to grips with the fact that too many religious leaders, so to speak, evangelical and Catholic leaders, have been complicit in that white Christian nationalism or have chosen to ignore some pretty horrible stuff as a trade-off for some of the goals that they favored. We've been talking about an organizing event in light of that, but we've also tried in the series to focus on what it will take to move us forward without denying the accountability that's necessary to get there. My colleague, Mary Beth Kearns Barrett, the director of the Office of College Chaplains, who's co-sponsoring the event today at the McFarland Center, agreed that we should focus one event on the ways that people of faith can build up a counter-narrative, one that does not surrender Christianity to America's worst political impulses. Our group today, discussion group, as you will see when Meg introduces them, is not terribly bipartisan, not bipartisan at all, really. But we hope that it will highlight for students an alternative way of Christian engagement in politics and public life. Our moderator for the day, Meg Griffiths of the class of 2004, will introduce our four alumni guests. Meg is Assistant Director of Programs at Essential Partners, a community building organization here in Massachusetts. Her professional background is at the intersection of education, dialogue, ministry, and the work for justice, with almost 15 years of experience in higher education and community-based organizations. Following her graduation from Holy Cross, Meg received a master's in pastoral ministry from Boston College's School of Theology and Ministry. When she's at home in Providence, Rhode Island, you can find her cooking vegetarian food, hosting game nights and community dinners with her wife, Heather Johnson of the class of '06. Meg will introduce our guests, but meanwhile, I want to welcome Heather, Broderick, Virginia, Mark, and Jarlenis. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's an honor to be back on the Hill, even though we're virtually on the Hill, and to be joined by my fellow alumni, current students, and the greater Holy Cross community. One of the things that I really treasure about a Holy Cross education is that we don't shy away from what I like to call the big important questions. So it's appropriate that our conversation today centers around this question: how can Catholics contribute to restoring public life? Over the next hour, our alumni speakers, who I'll introduce in just a second, will explore how our Catholic faith can contribute to a healthy, vibrant political and social life in our country. It's an opportunity for Mark, Virginia, Jarlenis, Broderick to speak from their personal experiences, offering the rest of us front row seats to what hopes to be a rich conversation. So let's meet our distinguished alumni. Broderick Johnson is a public policy and political strategist with more than 3 decades of leadership at the highest levels of government and the legal profession. He has served as assistant to the president and cabinet secretary under President Barack Obama. In that role, he was the president's primary liaison to members of the cabinet, directing a team that helped coordinate policy and communications strategy between the West Wing and federal agencies. President Obama also appointed Mr. Johnson the chairman of the White House's My Brother's Keeper Task Force, an interagency initiative designed to identify and address the disparities that hamper the success of boys and young men of color and to improve the lives of all young people. Mr. Johnson also served as a senior advisor for several presidential campaigns and as the deputy assistant to the president for legislative affairs under President Clinton. He graduated from Holy Cross in 1978 and earned his JD from the University of Michigan, where he has lectured on public policy and government relations. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, Mr. Johnson and his wife, NPR's Michelle Norris, have 3 children. Our next panelist is Virginia Doherty McGregor. Virginia McGregor is Treasurer, Deputy National Finance Chair, and National Co-Chair of the Women's Leadership Forum of the Democratic National Committee. She serves on the Geisinger Health Board of Directors and chairs the Geisinger Family Committee. She also serves as the chair of the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine Board of Directors. Prior to her appointment, Ms. McGregor served as chair of the CMCHS Board of Directors and previously served on the North Penn Bank Board of Directors, St. Joseph Center Foundation Board of Directors, and the Boys and Girls Club of Scranton Board of Directors. Ms. McGregor graduated from Holy Cross in 1982 and also attended the Harvard Kennedy School of Government Executive Education Program. She currently serves on the board of McGregor Industries, a family-owned business that is a manufacturer of miscellaneous and structural steel products for the construction industry. Ms. McGregor and her husband, Robert, live in Scranton, Pennsylvania with their 6 children. Our next panelist is Mark Kennedy Shriver. Mark Shriver is the president of Save the Children Action Network, where he leads an effort to mobilize Americans to ensure that every child in the US has access to high quality early childhood education and that children around the world survive and thrive. He is also senior vice president of US programs and advocacy at Save the Children. Mr. Shriver served as a member of the Maryland House of Delegates from 1994 to 2002. He is a New York Times bestselling author whose recently published children's book, 10 Hidden Heroes, highlights the various ways children and adults can be real-life heroes in their everyday lives. He is also the author of Pilgrimage, My Search for the Real Pope Francis, and A Good Man, Rediscovering My Father, Sergeant Shriver. Mr. Shriver graduated from Holy Cross in 1986 and holds a master's in public administration from Harvard University. He resides in Maryland with his wife, Jeannie, and their 3 children. And finally, Jarlenis Villamon is an outreach director within Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey's community engagement team. For the last 3 years, she has worked on issues and educational campaigns focused on the rights of workers, landlords, and tenants, and immigrants. A native of the Dominican Republic, she co-founded Lazos al Futuro, which translates to Ties to the Future, a leadership program for young people in the Dominican Republic. Ms. Villamon also served on the City of Cambridge Commission on Immigrant Rights and Citizenship and was a case manager working with immigrants and refugees at the Community Legal Services and Counseling Center, now known as the De Novo Center for Justice and Healing. A 2014 graduate of the college, Ms. Villamon has served as a Holy Cross trustee and as president and scholarship chair of the Holy Cross Club of Boston. She holds a master's in public administration from Suffolk University Sawyer Business School. Ms. Villamon and her husband, Jeffrey, reside in Wakeville, Massachusetts with their 2-month-old daughter. Whew, we made it, y'all. Welcome. Thank you. What a privilege to be in conversation with you all today. Thank you for joining. I have asked our speakers to share from their own experiences as fellow alumni, as Catholics in public life, and as humans. I've prepared just 2 multi-part meaty questions that our speakers will answer one at a time, leaving some time at the end for your questions, which you can submit at any time through the question and answer function of the webinar. All right, are we ready for our first question? It's a 2-parter and it invites some storytelling. And I didn't ask if anyone would be willing to go first, but I'm going to see if Virginia might be willing to go first because she's off mute already. I didn't know that she was volunteering. So thank you for volunteering to go first, Virginia. And then I'll just call an order on the screen. We'll do Broderick, then Mark, then Jarlenis, and I'll remind you. But here's our question. I'd love to hear from each of you. Tell us about a spiritual value, ethic, or teaching that you hold that has shaped your understanding of what makes a healthy society. And share a story about a formative moment in your life where that value, ethic, or teaching really impacted a decision or a commitment that you made. So tell us about the value, story, or ethic that means something important to you. And then tell us a story about a time when that really showed up in your life and it mattered in a decision or commitment. I've asked our speakers to share the airtime and make space for questions at the end. So keep yourself to about 3 to 4 minutes in your responses. Do your best. All right, Virginia, get us started.
All right. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. One correction, I'm in the class of 1984. I didn't want you to make me 2 years older. I was in Mary Beth Kearns Barrett's class. But I just want to say it's great to be back at Holy Cross, even if it's just virtually. I'm honored to be part of this event with this incredible panel of speakers. My fellow panelists are among the best of the best, and they've worked so hard to make our country better for all Americans. And how appropriate that we are having this conversation during Lent, a real time of renewal when we look at ourselves and see how we can improve. I'm a lifelong Catholic, and I grew up of one of 11 children. My dad was a salesman who sold religious articles, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom who went to 6:30 Mass every day. My association with Holy Cross goes back to the 1930s when my dad graduated in 1938 and now continues through the third generation with my nephew, Tommy Doherty, who's currently a junior. My daughter, Mary, when she graduated in 2019, was the 20th member of our family to graduate from Holy Cross. And you may have heard Joe Biden say this: when you grow up in Scranton, you're surrounded by priests in Catholic and Jesuit schools, and also by the IHM nuns. Their influence and outlook and compassion was instrumental in my foundation and in developing my faith. The IHM sisters and the Jesuits are the heart of Scranton, and they taught us that courage is cultivated through action, and your actions are cultivated through your faith. As for the spiritual value or ethic or teaching that I hold that has shaped my understanding of a healthy society, it's a complicated question, but with a simple answer. For me, every decision stems from my faith. My husband, Bob, and I have 3 pillars in our life. And it's family and faith and work, in that order. Everything starts with faith. I've always believed that faith is not a book that you pull down from the shelf every once in a while, that faith for me is a verb. And the corporal works of mercy inspire me to fully engage in my community, and more specifically, the Leviticus passage of do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is at stake. We're called to act. And that's really what motivates and inspires me. Scranton is very community-based. And we learned early on that when you lead by example through hard work and caring for your community and your neighbors. I serve on the board of a nationally renowned healthcare system, the Geisinger Health System. And through that, I was able to see how healthcare is delivered to the vulnerable populations. And a lot of that depends on who's in the White House. Few professions give you the ability to work every day to build a better world, but politics is one of them. The question of whether healthcare is a human right or a privilege for a few is argued every 4 years, and I happen to think that it's a human right. I also became aware through my involvement with Geisinger how policy shapes the lives of everyday Americans. I saw how important it is for someone in office who believes that healthcare should take care of the most vulnerable while expanding access for everyone. I'm always struck by the fact that in communities like Scranton, we've been dying of the same things for 4 and 5 generations, and we have to start doing something different. And with that in mind, I decided to get more engaged at the national level. And I chose to participate in Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2015 and 16. It was a way that I saw I could fit in. I saw the way that people in my family had helped by serving our community. My dad was a city councilman, and one of my brothers, my brother Chris, was mayor of Scranton for many years. And I saw how they were driven by wanting to serve others and how much they could help people. And I saw I could do that too in my own way. So I stepped into the Clinton campaign because I wanted to build a better world and set the example for my own children. And then it just snowballed to where it is now. And I was so honored and humbled to have been appointed by President Biden to serve as the treasurer for the Democratic National Committee, where I have a seat at the table in matters that affect Americans every day. You know, I get to see firsthand everything that goes into caring for the people of our country. Democrats do have a unified belief that government and politics can be a force for good to help those less fortunate, just as Jesus and our other religious figures consistently mention in their teachings. There's a lot that we have to fix, but as one of 11 children, my parents used to tell us that if there's a problem, who else is going to fix it but you? You have to do what's in your power, and you have to do it with the right intentions. That's the role faith plays for me in creating health policy and a healthy society. It's a faith in action and a service for others and caring about the world made greater by the sum of its parts. So thanks.
Thank you. Roderick.
Oh, Virginia, that was beautiful. So it's really nice to meet you. Tom, thank you very much for inviting me to this session. And Meg, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. But I want to point out a couple of mistakes too. So I graduated in 1998. Okay, no. So, all right, I'll own up to it. I graduated in 1978. That was absolutely right. And what I want to point out is that, you know, our graduation speaker, our commencement speaker in 1978 was none other than Vernon Jordan. And so when he passed away a few weeks ago, it was, you know, of course, very, very sad at a personal level, because I got to know him over several decades, and he was a bit of a mentor of mine. And I remember going to visit him once maybe about 4 or 5 years ago in his office. And he pulled out the graduation speech from 1978, and he gave me a copy of it because I admitted to him that I didn't remember anything that he said because I was so nervous that day. But he was a wonderful, wonderful person. And I was looking at an online version of my yearbook from that year recently, in fact, last week, and trying to find pictures of the graduation and him. And I have to admit, one thing that jumped out at me was that I was really pretty absent student in terms of the student body. I was involved in organizations and certainly had close friends, but I didn't embrace Holy Cross when I was a student there in ways that I have embraced it so much more over the decades, because I recognize the impact it had on my values sort of from a distance. But and so that has actually led me to be one of the trustees of the college now, which is so remarkable. I'm sure that many of my classmates from that period would think, how in the world did that happen, that he became a trustee? And I know it's because of God's tremendous mercy and blessings that I've been able to achieve things that would allow me to come back to Holy Cross and to be very present at Holy Cross again. So let me talk a little bit about my background and how it relates to my values. So I grew up in Baltimore, that was very Catholic, still is a very Catholic town for African-American families. So my parents sent us all to Catholic schools. The priests and nuns in elementary school convinced me that I had the calling to be a priest. So I attended a high school seminary in Lenox, Massachusetts for 1 year. It's now Canyon Ranch, but it was a high school seminary. I see Mark yes, that was a seminary way back then. But it was the height of the Vietnam War. And it wasn't long, of course, after, so the terrible assassinations, particularly in 1968, that led to riots in Baltimore. So when I went off to the seminary, it was really a bit of an escape for 1 year, but I was only there for 1 year. During that period too, I don't know, some of you may remember, but folk masses had become quite popular, of course. And so all of the masses in my last years in elementary school, and then of course, when I went off to seminary, the guitarists were the accompanimists. And I remember there was one song in particular that still sticks in my head. And it's from Matthew 25. And it's It's about serving the least of these. Whatsoever you do for the least of my brothers and sisters, you do for me, whether it's visiting in prison or people who feeding the poor or the hungry, those who are sick. And that has guided me then throughout my life so much. And then in politics. So I was very involved in John Kerry's campaign for president. Very proud to do that. And then in the Barack Obama campaigns, I had the opportunity in both campaigns, especially in the second campaign, to lead an effort to make sure that we could convince Catholics to continue to support Barack Obama. And we, of course, really accentuated issues like healthcare and how that mattered so deeply to people and addressing the needs of the least fortunate. And, you know, through that hard work, and it was very hard work, especially the second time, there were a lot of Catholic leaders in the United States who were against John Kerry, yes, but Barack Obama's reelection. Proudly, we were able to win the Catholic vote, and it's important to win the Catholic vote if you're going to be president of the United States. I think if you go back and look at the data historically, if the presidential candidate does not win the Catholic vote, that person doesn't become president. It goes back several decades. So there I was in the White House in 2015 as cabinet secretary and chair of the My Brother's Keeper Task Force when the Pope visited. And I had the opportunity to have an audience with the Pope and to be introduced to the Pope by Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, and to have President Obama lean into the Pope and say, "This is my Catholic guy here. And he works on issues that address the needs of the least of these in our society." And that was just a remarkable moment. And so in terms of commitments, then I think about all of my life and upbringing from Catholic school to the 1 year in a seminary to being at Holy Cross and being a philosophy major and all the blessings since then. And so my commitment when President Obama asked me to chair My Brother's Keeper was absolutely, it's life's mission. And I'm so proud to do this work. So those are the values, and that's a commitment that especially most recently has guided decisions that I've made. So thank you.
Thanks, Broderick. And thanks for giving me a slight heart attack that I had your age off by 20 years. Thank you for that.
It's okay. I owe you. That's all right.
All right, Mark.
Thanks a million, Meg, and many thanks to Tom and to Mary Beth and to my fellow panelists here. I worked in Baltimore coming out of Holy Cross. The stories Broderick just mentioned growing up in Baltimore, reminding me of Father Burke over there who ran Catholic Charities in Baltimore City, and Doris Johnson, and my work working with juvenile delinquents in Baltimore. Thank you for bringing that back, Broderick. And thank you for saying that the seminary turned into a 5-star resort. And the Catholic Church really knows how to buy good real estate.
Or sell it.
Yeah, they sell it and make some dough and turn it into a place like that. I'm just very quickly going to say, when I went to Holy Cross, in the chapel down below the main church there was a banner when I was there that had the words from Micah that said, "This is what Yahweh asks of you, only this, to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God." And I always loved the lines that said, "Only this," as if, you know, acting justly, loving tenderly, and walking humbly with God was that easy. And I've kept that, you know, kind of always with me. To act justly, to love tenderly, to walk humbly with God is really hard to do, but really what I hope guides my life. I mean, I think from Virginia mentioned Matthew 25, right? The idea of feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless, visiting those in prison. It's this little book I just wrote, 10 Hidden Heroes. It's a children's book, is based on that. The hidden heroes are the ones that are feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless, visiting those in prison. And I think that's what guides the discussion in public life, or should guide that, or at least that's what I'm trying to do. You know, Tom mentioned the fact that we're not bipartisan here. My roommate at Holy Cross is a rock rib Republican, huge Republican. He was a Republican when we lived together. He's one now. He made some dough. The first, check he wrote after he made a little bit of dough when he sold his company was to Holy Cross. He does a lot of work in Chicago with Arrupe College, which is the first community college set up by the Jesuits in the world. And he's one of their strongest supporters, board member with about 4 or 5 other members from Holy Cross. So I don't think this is a bipartisan thing. I think, we all try to express our commitment to the common good in different ways. I think Virginia beautifully talked about, as Democrats, the commitment to the right of healthcare. And I think that the Democratic Party, for me anyways, expresses those values better than being an independent or being a Republican. And I think that that's, how do we bring people together to have a better discussion in our public life around the values that we care about. And I think that's the struggle. I think if we do it with some humility and not thinking we're always right, because we're not, if we do it with talking about seeking justice and doing it with some sense of, as corny as it sounds, some sense of love, that makes a big difference. I do want to bop my roommate in the head from Holy Cross constantly because I think I'm right and he's wrong. But we laugh about it and we try to move towards some common understanding. And I think that's what we've got to get back to more of, to look at the other, not as the enemy, but to look as the other as, as Ignatius said, God's in all things. And if you really believe that, God's in this conversation. And it's not just because we're all, I guess, Democrats on this, but because, God is in all things. And we have to look at Republicans and Democrats and independents as being loved by God. And how do we start bringing back a more civil conversation to move the country forward? So I'm excited, Meg, to have that conversation. And I'll wrap up my comments with that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mark. Jarlinis.
Thank you so much, Meg. And I feel really privileged to be surrounded by so many amazing alumni talking about important things as Catholic, as what we can do. So thinking about myself as a Catholic and what teachings and values I do and I come across when I take up on different type of projects in my community, I always think about growing up back in the Dominican Republic with my grandmother, my single mother who raised me to be the woman that I am today. And they always told me, what would Jesus do? Why you should walk in the shoes of Jesus, but what would he do? Remember that you are Dominican and you should never forget where you come from. And I grew up in a very poor town in the Dominican Republic, in the northern area of Puerto Plata in there. So coming to the United States in 2001, I always thought about that. I didn't know English, but I knew one thing. It was my faith and my family. As a Catholic social teacher is always teaching you that family is everything. You have to stay in solidarity with the most need, but also walk in the shoes of Jesus. And one important privilege that I got, that changed my whole life completely. And the views that I have right now is coming to becoming an alumni at Holy Cross, because my faith has always brought me different places in life, but I always put my heart into what would Jesus allow me to do and follow as the leader in my community. And when I was at Holy Cross, I got the chance to start the Spanish choir with Father Reiser. And I traveled to Bolivia to study theology, and seeing a whole different perspective in a different community, it touched my heart because I wanted to do more. So I started volunteering even more at Holy Cross, doing community organizing. And I didn't know that all the different things and experiences that I was going to encounter will lead me to the position that I have today. So when I was finishing my master's in public administration, it is right at Suffolk in the middle, and we call it like the downtown of Boston, where you have the policymakers in a huge building that is called the McCover Building. It's the governmental building. And I always looked up and I said, one day I want to work there. And I prayed about it, because one important thing as a Catholic, you always got to put your trust in Jesus and to the whole entire religion, but also follow your heart. Because one important information that we should know and we should allow ourselves, even when we are surrounded in a world that, you know, we see so much good, so much evil, we have to think about, as the leader, what would we do? So I looked into the building and I told myself, one day I'm going to work there, but I don't know where. And a position came up. Somebody, a colleague of mine, I was working at De Novo, which is a legal aid agency in Cambridge. And I was working there, and my colleague was like, Jelenis, you will be perfect for this job. I didn't know. I prayed about it, and I was like, I'm just going to go for it. I don't know nobody. It was the Attorney General's office, and God wanted me to be there. So I started as an outreach coordinator, and right away into a year, I got promoted as an outreach director. And into my position, into the decision, especially being an important agency, a governmental agency, and being Catholic, I told myself, okay, what am I going to do as an outreach director? And one important thing is bringing information to the most need. I travel statewide in different communities that are rich, that are poor, that are middle class. And I meet different people, from immigrants to different backgrounds. And I always try to stay in an open mind, open heart, and walk in the shoes of Jesus, like my grandma always used to teach me. So one important thing in the decisions that I make in my position is teaching others, leading with a passionate heart, because important thing that you have to remember as a Catholic is that you have to lead with a passionate heart. You have to make sure that you should never forget who you are, no matter what position that you come to, no matter how many doors are open to you. And it's very important, especially as a Latina, I always try to make sure that anything that I get involved in, especially, you know, I have been a board member for a foundation of the Dominican Republic that is they serve the greater Boston area. And now I'm an assessor. And one important thing that I push to that organization is citizenship classes, because there's so many people uneducated, but God always has called me to do service, to serve with a heart. And that is the most important thing. And never forget what is family, never forget those values in the community and what you can change. I have done smallest things that sometimes I think, oh my God, it is not important. But I always remember one quote that is one of my favorite saints, Mother Teresa. And she said, we ourselves, we feel that what we do is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean will be less without that drop. And when you think about, especially if you're hearing me right now as a student, as an alumni, and you're coming into this amazing event today, what I want you to know is, as a Catholic, you can make important changes, important and powerful impacts in a smaller scales. And I have done a lot of community organizing. I have done a lot of campaign for like city councils, state representative. And, you know, as a Democrat myself, I always think about, we have to be combined into two, be in solidarity. Even if you're a Republican, if you're a Catholic, if you are a Democrat, we all Catholic. And we all leaders, but we have to make sure that we teach the next generation to come and to teach our own community the important, powerful impacts that you as a leader, as a Catholic leader, you want your community to do. And even if it's a smaller scale, because powerful, as Virginia mentioned, policy shapes the life of every day. So powerful decisions are being made, even if it's in their community. Even if it's not a larger in Washington, D.C. with congressmen, it can be a lower level. You can start locally. And that's what I have done. I have made sure that wherever you go, what community you're being into, stepping into, what are the needs? What do you need to walk in Jesus' shoes to make sure that you're changing that you're changing and you're impacting that community? And I say this because I grew up in Cambridge. So when I landed in the United States, I grew up in Cambridge for so many years. That's the city my mother decided to choose because of the amazing education. And it led me to later on go to Stoneham, Massachusetts, which is a smaller town. So there is a difference between being in a city and a town. let me tell you, especially because there's so many less things to do. And I was used to doing a lot of things, especially being, you know, as Meg mentioned, I was the chair of the Immigrants Commission in Cambridge, which is the first commission that they created to do a lot of events and educational on the immigrants, especially because, you know, immigrants, they come into this country, but some of them are fearful of what it is because of the past leaders or the leaders that are today. And something that I think about is staying hopeful. So one important value out of all is you have to have the faith that things can change, that you can have a healthy society. And as a Catholic, you can tell others to make sure that you have faith, because Jesus never gave up on anybody. He took everybody at the same time, and he walked his shoes to teach everybody his love and the greatest thing of God. So when you are a leader, you lead with passion, with empathy, even though some people would not lead with those values. But you have to remember to be you, because the energy as a Catholic that you spread to others, you change other people's heart. So when I'm traveling to different communities, and it might be a community that might be the only Latina, Afro-Latina, and it might be a community that is full white, I come with a passionate heart, and I teach like I teach to a Latino community. I go with a passionate heart, because that's what is a Catholic. That's what is meant to be a leader in communities as a Catholic, to be with an open heart, open spirit, and to lead and to walk in Jesus' shoes. So those are the things I have come and taken into heart, especially as of right now, and being a mother as well, and thinking about what I have to teach my 2-month baby girl as a Catholic, for her to be a woman for others and with others.
Thank you so much, Charlenice. Oh, there's a lot of passion of heart in this group. I'm so grateful to be getting just a snapshot of it from each of you. So we're going to move into our second question, and it's another sort of complex question. Take what you'd like from it in terms of your response. So, you know, our whole theme today is how Catholics can contribute to restoring public life. So in this opportunity to share, tell us about what it means to you to live out your faith in our current social and political context, if you haven't shared that already, and especially what roles Catholics can play in shaping that. And then we haven't talked about this maybe as much, so I'd love to hear from folks. You know, where are the places, if any, where you feel pulled in different directions as a Catholic in public life, where there's a sticking point or where you feel a little stuck? So tell us a little bit about what you think the role Catholics can play in public life might look like. And then where, if at all, do you get pulled in different directions as you think about this? I'm going to pick a new order and see if maybe Broderick might be willing to go first this time. And if so, thank you for unmuting yourself. That feels like a yes. Then we'll hear from Mark, and then Charlenice, and then Virginia.
Sure. Well, look, I'm just going to be very blunt about a couple of things. You know, I've been in Washington since 1983. I worked on the Hill since then in various roles. And I've seen a terrible breakdown in our political order. And I remember it sort of started when Newt Gingrich decided to do everything he could to take the reins of the House of Representatives back from the Democrats after 40 years. And it was very much a scorched earth policy. It was kind of the beginning of it. And it just continued to get worse. There have been some bipartisan achievements, no question about that, but not many, and especially not lately. And the pain for someone like me who had worked on the Hill and had been in the Capitol, so many beautiful occasions and moments of what happened on January 6th, I have an incredibly difficult time then reconciling how it is that Catholic brothers and sisters can justify the division and hatred in our body politics. Perhaps it will take Catholic leaders, principal Catholic leaders on both sides of the aisle to bring us out of that. I do hope that because we now have a Catholic president, that will have some impact on all of that. But it's been really, really difficult to watch and to be part of, and to feel like we've entered into this awful stage that, unless we turn it around, unless folks work to turn it around, will lead to the destruction of our democracy in many respects. I do want to reflect on something very personal that pulls me into, and your second question has to do with being pulled in different directions. So my wife, Michelle, and I have raised our children as devout Catholics. They didn't attend parochial school during the day, but they went through Sunday school starting with probably when they were 5 years old. And they became, both our son and daughter became altar servers. And proudest moments being when they got a chance to be the servers for Easter or Catholic services, because those are such high religious services, of course, tremendous pride. However, and this is where we get pulled in different directions. It was in 2012, I was on the Obama campaign, had been at the University of Dayton the week before, organizing for President Obama. We were doing an event. We were going to be confronted by Tea Party people. We were very worried about what that event was going to be like. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, you know, I came here to protest, but after listening to you and other Catholic supporters of President Obama, you know, I may not vote for him, but I appreciate hearing what you all had to say. So week later, I'm home in DC, we're at Mass. A visiting priest starts off his sermon by saying, I may never be invited back here again, but I'm going to talk about how homosexuality is a sin. And then his whole sermon was about that. And after it was over, a woman got up from her pew sitting between her parents and left in tears. And our then 12-year-old son wrote that priest a letter, sent it to Minnesota, where he was from, saying, please don't come back to our church ever again because you caused such pain. Little did I know that it was also personally painful for our son, because 6 years later, he came out, and he came out publicly on Facebook. And 2 years later, our daughter came out. And so both of our children, who we have raised to be devout Catholics, are now very, very challenged. And so are we about remaining Catholic, because when the way the people they love and and who they are is being depicted as sinful, that is extraordinarily difficult for us to remain Catholics. And it's something we have to pray on. So that's where I get pulled in different directions, and it's very, very, very painful.
I guess I'm supposed to go next, Meg. I guess I'm going to cede my time to Broderick and just say, so what do you do about that? I mean, are you sticking around, or are you like, I had a conversation with a priest who said to me, you know, I'm not giving up my vision of what the Catholic Church is. So I'm going to fight for it. Part of me is like, you know, I'm with you. It's like, you know, if that happens, why do we stick around?
No, you know, I've seen the church certainly evolve and change, and, you know, certainly, but at the same time, looking at the pain that it causes our children, and the fact that we want them to remain Catholic, but I don't know how they can, and we've seen them pull away. We've seen them pull away. So I don't know, Mark. I don't know. Like, I don't want to go to church without our kids, right? When they're visiting from college, we want the whole family to go to Mass on Christmas Eve. I don't want to be there with Michelle and our kids aren't there because of how objectionable it all is for them. So I don't know. A big part of it, of course, as we pray, there has been certainly some change, but not nearly enough. And I don't know if it'll happen fast enough.
You know, I mean, I know I have like 2 minutes here, Meg, but if you look at it, you know, there are a lot of students on this call. So they're 19, 20, I guess you're the age of your kids. Or one's in college, one just graduated. It's like, you know, why do they stick around? What's pulling them to want to stick in the church that I guess we're all going to?
I think it's because they still know it's what made them, in many respects, such good, caring people. And we go to a church where there's a great deal of embrace of everyone. That visiting priest that day was he was an anathema. He did not represent the views of our pastor and other leaders in our church, St. Augustine's here in DC. But
it's a great church,
you know. So, but is that enough? I don't know.
I guess my only thought, and then I'll I don't know if it was Virginia, but you know, is that it's like that Teddy Roosevelt line, right? It's like, you know, you got to get in the arena and stay in the arena. And, you know, if you're going to cede the church to, you know, people that aren't, you know, filled with what I think is love and trying to move what Jesus would do, to use the earlier comment, right?
Yeah, no, that's right.
If you're not, then you got to get out of the arena. But if you're in the arena and you're whatever, 18, 22 years old, you're Holy Cross, you're going to get knocked down. I mean, your kid at 12 is, you know, feeling pain. But, you know, and that's what Roosevelt talked about, is you're going to get beat up, you're going to get dusted, you're going to get bloodied. But I guess I'm not ready to cede the church to that type of animosity and anger. I mean, Jesus spent a lot of time with, as Pope Francis says, on the fringes, getting his shoes muddy, not hanging around with the rich people and the cardinals and the establishment. Obviously, there were no cardinals, but not hanging out with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the governors. He's hanging around with the poor people and the people on the margins, which is what Pope Francis calls us to do. So I'm with your kid.
He wrote that note to the priest, say, don't come back here. This is our church. So that took a lot of courage, to say the least. And still there were things that we didn't know about what his motivation was.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I lost track of who was next.
That's okay. Thanks for your curiosity and your question to Broderick, Mark. I think Jarlenis is next. I want to note the time. We have about 10 minutes. So we want to get to a couple of questions if we can. So go ahead.
I just want to say, you know, I'm 29 years old, and you can say, well, Jarlenis, you have a strong faith. But no, my faith got shaken up many times. But just as Mark stated, it's about where you put your heart in the people that need it the most. And that's where you will see Jesus Christ. And that's where your faith will get even more stronger, is where the need are. And I encourage each and every student listening to me today that you might have your faith shaken up right now. Do a lot of immersion trips. It will change your life completely, because it did change mine, especially my spirituality growth. But one important thing where my life goes, right now, my life is in many different directions, but I feel when I joined the board of trustee at Holy Cross, it did change my life completely, because I started joining a lot of more boards at a local level in nonprofit organizations. And that I started to do my own nonprofit agency for youth in the Dominican Republic, focusing on education. So although I work a lot more in the governmental public service life as an outreach director, educating communities about workers' rights and immigrant rights and different other type of rights, it is just important about where your heart and where God pulls you many different directions, and you can do many different things in a very leadership aspects and views. So my important thing it can be is that you can do a lot of important work locally. You can join boards. So when you graduate as an alumni at Holy Cross, remember this: you can be a voice for other and a change maker. And that's where I have my view, is spreading the faith, even if it's in social media, and being solidarity with the most community that need it the most, or spreading strong work in communities like mine in the Dominican Republic, or communities where you grew up and they need you the most. Those were different changes. You can make a lot of changes as a Catholic and as a community leader.
Thank you, Jarlenis. Virginia.
Well, thank you, Megan. I talk fast, so I will do my best to stay in time. But Broderick, thank you for sharing that intimate story of your family. And it reminds us that we, have to look forward and look outside our own families. But even when we feel that we're pulled in different directions, at the heart of being Catholic is about courage. And it's about the ability to stand up for what is right, even if it isn't popular. Catholicism has shaped my thoughts towards service at a young age, and it led me to advocate for candidates who value helping the poor and the less fortunate. The country has gone through some really difficult times, especially these last 4 years, with the divisive language of the last president, as well as the growing rates of hate crimes and violent racism. But where we are now, having this conversation, because there's a Catholic president in the White House and one who makes it clear how much his faith guides his actions, is reassuring to me. Joe Biden has relied on his faith throughout his whole life in order to make it through some of the worst situations anyone could have endured. He carries a rosary in his pocket. He attends Mass almost every day. He lives his faith as a verb. He looks out for others and he puts other people first. His outlook is love your neighbor. And it is our responsibility to lift everyone up. The Democrats are a diverse party and we're very diverse, but we also carry the same values: caring for others, lifting people up, and wanting to make ourselves and everyone else better. The American Rescue Bill, which just passed, does just that. And it's a bipartisan plan, not because of a vote, but because the majority of Americans support it. Catholicism, to me, isn't about what we're against, it's about what we're for. Voting to give aid to American families during this pandemic, to expand access to COVID-19 vaccination shots, and to provide funds to safely open our schools. All of that is the right thing to do, but that's the easy stuff. There are issues that are far more complicated, and two areas that stand out for me, particularly Christ-like, are caring for our immigrants and helping women and children out of poverty. How do we love thy neighbor? There's an ongoing border crisis, and the problem isn't going to go away immediately, but we're coming out with some humanitarian solutions. We want everyone to feel welcome in this country. The Gospels call us to offer shelter and to offer food and to offer water and to love those who need it. We also have to help women out of poverty. Just yesterday, we observed Equal Pay Day. On average, women earn 82 cents on the dollar of what men earn. We have to close that gap. We have to do better. And we also need to support women and children by providing access to healthcare and daycare, and by ensuring that women are protected from abuse and violence. The heart and soul of the bills come from grassroots needs of the people and the commitment to caring for everyone. That's faith as a verb. We're going to encounter obstacles, but we have to do what's right and we have to keep moving. Politics, like life, can be very frustrating and very disappointing, but it can also be so inspiring and so hopeful and so courageous. Few professions give people the ability to work every day for a world they hope to live in, and politics is one of them. I always think about the Jesuits and how the Jesuits let us know that we are born for higher things, that we need to be the best that we can be so that we can fulfill what God has in store for us. And to the students listening, cultivate your faith and cultivate your faith in yourself. I talked as fast as I could.
Thank you so much. We have just a few minutes and we only have a few questions. And one you've been grappling with already. A question was asked about how you manage the moments where it does feel like your faith is at odds with some values around inclusivity, for example. So you're welcome to continue that part of the conversation if you'd like. I'll offer this other question that asks sort of a similar question about tensions and balancing being outspoken about your faith and also your beliefs when they might be at odds, and also still supporting the church. So there's, I think, some overlap there, just a continuation of this conversation about moments of tension that you might experience. And anyone is welcome to answer in about 30 seconds or so this very complicated question. Or raise your own question.
I mean, I think if you're asking, I think, Pope Francis talks a lot about tension and living with tension, and that life is not black and white, and that you have to, as Virginia just said, have courage, but you have to stay with it and struggle. And that's okay. I mean, I don't think anybody, there is no black and white answer here. I mean, what Broderick's dealing with his kids, what, I'm dealing with when I think of, other Catholics I know who I disagree with, you have to struggle with it. You got to pray on it. I think the best thing that Holy Cross has, and I've said this to every priest that was the head of that school, and I'll say it to the new guy, is they ought to make it almost mandatory to go on these spiritual exercises there, because that is so powerful. And I've done it a bunch of times since I got out of Holy Cross. Just the idea of learning how to have a relationship with God and struggling with that and trying to grow with that over the course of your life is what the Jesuits have, and that Ignatius started 500 years ago, that Harvard doesn't have, Yale doesn't have, Stanford doesn't have. And that's why this is the best school in the country, because it teaches you how to have a relationship with God and to struggle in that, whether you're doing big shot things or working, as we heard earlier, on little things. That's what makes life important. And to come to grips with that makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
so go on retreat. Go on a retreat. You can go out and party next weekend. Just go away for 2 days. It's good to be quiet.
I would follow up with what Mark said and Broderick. It's our church to make better. After the pedophile scandal that was in Massachusetts and especially in Pennsylvania, it was a hard time to talk as Catholics. And is this the church that we want to be a part of? And I had conversations with my children that the church is all of us. It is not the people who have done terrible things and made mistakes, said terrible things in front of Broderick's son. It is us. And it's for us to continue to make better and to secure the future. And we can only do that by keeping our voice.
Yeah, and I was just going to add this, that, so when he was vice president and Joe Biden came out in favor of gay marriage, again, I didn't know, our children had not expressed their identity to us, but it must have meant so much to them when he did that. I'll never forget. I know we're running out of time. I'm sorry. Very quick story. Rushing my kids to school one day. They're in like high school, early high school years. They were asking me if, my wife and I sold the house, which of them would get it. And our daughter said, well, how about if we just split it between our families? And she said, like maybe my husband and I will want to live in that house and we can share it with Norris and his wife. And Norris, our younger son, said, well, how do you know you're going to marry a man? And she said, and so it's like, wow, you just sort of reflect now on all the things that they were thinking over time. And then going back again to the importance of having now President Biden and how courageous he has been, in a sense that, you know what, it's worth fighting for, right? It's all worth fighting for, this country and our church and our values. Don't give up on it.
I was going to say the same thing. Don't give up. Have faith. When there's hope, there's change. And, when the riot happened on January 6th, I was pregnant. I was 33 weeks. And I was, oh my God, what is this world going to come? But I prayed about it and I said, I have hope that change can come. And, Biden and Vice President Harris is making a lot of changes and things are feeling more normal. They're leading with empathy. And that's what was lacking before. So what I can tell you is be outspoken, continue to be outspoken, because people need to hear about it and changes needs to happen. But you have to remember to always have faith and be hopeful that things can come together. And as a church, we can be one church, one inclusivity, and make changes happen and walk in Jesus' shoes, because Jesus accepted everybody. So we just have to self-reflect as well. And one important thing, I did the silence retreat. So any students who are seniors or juniors, I would encourage you to do the silence retreat. Being in silence really help you reflect upon what things can be going on that might be destructive, or you might be having issues. It will help you a lot, self-reflect. And it helped me when I was a senior, and I did it, and I'm very outspoken.
There you go.
Well, I like to say as a facilitator, it's my job to start and end really good conversations. Unfortunately, our time is up. I want to just say a huge thank you to our alumni. And what I'm taking away are some tidbits that I heard from you. Only this: faith is a verb, walk in Jesus' shoes, and seek justice for the least of these. So I want to just thank you for leaving that with us. And I think Mary Beth's just going to say a quick close.
Yeah, thank you so much. What a rich conversation. It has been a pure delight for me to listen to all of you. And what I'm taking away is that the struggle for justice that's born of our faith is one that we bring into the political sphere and into the church. And in both places, we need to be people who work for change and to really pay attention to our relationship with God, which the spiritual exercises helps to nurture. And so I'm so glad that you all put in a plug for that, because we're still doing them. And we welcome both our alumni and our students to spend that time with God so that you can figure out where God is calling you to make faith your verb. So thank you so much. What a joy to be with all of you. You're wonderful. Thanks.
Great to be